spices and herbs and medical plants. This is China mystic. Use it here like incense. Put in a fire and smell it good. And this we sell it for 100 years. Many people come and ask about this one because it's famous, and we bring it from China by ship. And this is black pepper. This expensive one here. This is more expensive in gold in here in Egypt. This is cinnamon Ceylon, coming from Ceylon Island. You know it, sure. And this as a kind of cinnamon here, this one. And this, the famous medical in all the world, myrrh. We call it myrrh. You know it. Take a little piece like this in the morning, and you will feel so good. Be clean the blood for a stomach, for a skin, for many reasons. This one, use it. Many people come and ask about these spices. They know it for many thousand years here. This is a history of spices here in this shop. Here.
Other goods the Muslims controlled came across the Sahara from the African interior. Although the journey by camel caravan could take 2 months, it was well worth the effort. Gold was the caravan's most valuable cargo. Sought by the pharaohs, it would one day obsess Columbus. In the back alleys of Cairo, gold has been crafted into jewelry for thousands of years. In the late Middle Ages, gold was an important means of exchange, and much of it wound up here. Not only was there gold brought from Africa, but also the gold that European merchants had to pay Muslims for the spices, silks, and porcelains brought here from the Indies. And so the great Muslim cities like Cairo grew rich from trade. As long as European merchants had to come here to buy, Muslim fortunes were secure. It was the quintessential seller's market.
Would you like to see what we have here? Something maybe you've never seen it before. You can enter. Come to see what we have. We have very things here lovely. It is all made of cover and price.
But what makes a seller happy has the opposite effect on a buyer, no matter how friendly it seems on the surface.
If you like it, you can make it.
Don't like it that much.
Okay, what would you like to be happy with this one?
I'll give you 10 for it.
Do you know how much they sell it?
You say 25.
Not that European merchants were doing badly. They could double their money by selling Eastern goods to customers back home. But they could make much more if only they could go directly to the source.
The world of Islam was a formidable barrier, blocking Europe from those parts of the world which really interested it. That's the big problem that faced the Europeans. How on earth to do without the Muslim middleman, if they could.
The Christian Europeans and the Muslims had been rivals from the 7th century on, when Muhammad first proclaimed what he called the true religion of Abraham. From the beginning, Islam greatly respected trade and commerce. Muhammad himself was a trader, and for centuries Arab merchants made both converts and profits.
Islam was a missionary religion. It had the truth revealed to Muhammad, and it was the duty and role of the true believers to enforce the truth, if necessary, sword in hand. But it's also the case that the mercantile impetus to find new markets and extend to new parts of the world along these trade routes, both land and sea, pulled the true faith behind it.
Thus, Islam was a triple threat to Columbus's Europe, religiously, militarily, and economically.
For Europeans like Columbus, it was particularly galling that it was the Muslims who stood between them and the riches of the Orient. Columbus, of course, was a very devout Christian who saw Muslims as infidels and kept talking of mounting a holy crusade to take Jerusalem away from them. Now, for a less determined man, all these obstacles might have been too much. But for Columbus, the lure of the Orient was too powerful. And, fortunately, two things close to home inspired him to go forward. The memoirs of an adventurous merchant called Marco Polo, and the great city in which he had lived, Venice.
While Marco Polo inspired Columbus to seek his fortune, Venice taught him to let nothing stand in his way. Each spring, in a ceremony called the Marriage to the Sea, Venice celebrates its past victories and the driving ambition that helped launch a commercial empire. In the year 1423, the Doge, the city's head of state, reported to his council as follows.
The turnover of our foreign trade has reached 10 million ducats a year. Profit 40%. Venice owns 3,000 smaller trading vessels, sailed by 17,000 men, and 300 great ships with crews totaling 8,000. Besides this, we have 45 galleys with not fewer than 11,000 men abroad.
The sea had been a very good spouse indeed.
From the 12th century onward, Venice was one of the prime trading cities of Europe. And of all of the trading cities, the one in which landed aristocracy or territorial rulers were absent. It was a merchant's community. Nobody but merchants. They ran it for themselves and for their own benefit.
The merchants' profits were enough to make Venice the envy of Europe. Count Alvise Zorzi is a descendant of a medieval doge. Here, the doge presided over Europe's most vital commercial center, the Rialto.
We are approaching the Rialto Bridge, which is now a famous site, which is built of stone, and which till the end of the 16th century was wooden and open in the middle to allow the passage of the galleys and of the ships, and merchandises were brought directly at the houses. Each one of the palaces that you can see around were then a mixture of private homes and of trading centers. Fish, vegetables, fruits, all that has always existed here. It was one of the richest marketplaces of northern Italy. But there was something that nowadays doesn't exist anymore, the banks. The market of coins, of gold, of credit. It was a very important item in the national economy. And the banks were all here.
The commercial history of the Rialto can still be seen in street signs. A street for herbs, a street for insurance, and above all, a street for spices.
Spice was maybe the richest item in which Venetian traders used to negotiate. It was so rich that we can really say that the greatest part of those beautiful palazzi alongside the Cava Grande were built upon spices.
Although the Venetians grew rich from the Eastern trade, they never traveled to the Orient themselves, except for one period around 200 years before Columbus was born, when a handful of men made it through. Of the few who were allowed into China, one had a major impact on Columbus, a 15-year-old merchant's son named Marco Polo. Marcello Cicuto is a professor of medieval literature who has studied and edited Marco Polo's writings.
Marco andò in Oriente, visitò.
Marco went to the Orient. He visited the Far East with his father and uncle because he was a merchant pushed by a merchant's desire to make money in a project that led to the sale of merchandise. Once he was there, he became an ambassador of Western culture to the Orient, and later an ambassador of Eastern culture to the West.
Polo returned home to Venice in 1295 after spending 20 years in China. But his unique story would never have been known to Columbus if Polo hadn't dictated his memoirs. Il Milione, as the book was called, went through many editions and was lavishly illustrated by artists who felt free to elaborate on Polo's realistic descriptions.
These illustrations come from a 15th century French edition from the National Library of Paris, and perhaps are the best known and most widespread illustrations. Here, we have the Persian city of Hormuz, based on a typical Western misconception of the East. So it's transformed into a Gothic European-looking city with an Indian elephant. And here, for example, is a Chinese palace with Western architecture and Gothic knights.
But Marco Polo knew better. He saw everything with the eyes of a practical merchant. He carefully noted the harvest of black pepper in India. And this was his description of the emperor's wealth. Several times a year, parties of traders arrive with pearls and precious stones and gold and silver and other valuables, and surrender them all to the great Khan. The world's great potentates put together have not such riches as belong to the great Khan alone.
Columbus had, as we know, a copy of Milione at his disposal. He owned it. It's the copy now kept in the Library of Seville. And he abundantly annotated this text, especially in those parts where Marco supplies information about distances, about goods, about the riches of the Orient.
This is the principal window that the medieval Europeans had then upon the world of China, the world toward which Columbus thought he was going. In this sense, the Venetians were sort of pivotal in expanding the knowledge the other Europeans had of the world to the east of them.
Before Marco Polo, geographical knowledge of the East was extremely sketchy at best. In this 12th century map, only the Mediterranean area is clearly recognizable. Some maps, called Mappamundi, were not even meant to be geographically accurate. Instead, they reflected Christian theology. So the holy city of Jerusalem was always at the center, sometimes embedded in Christ's navel.